I'm okay.
His wife had trying to terrorize him, so if I'm terrorizing him, I have permission from the Oga at the top.
Oh, the ways I suffer, the ways I suffer.
Hi, Richard.
Hello,
How are you?
Khadija.
Do you have a
Absolutely.
copy?
Yeah, I have a
Okay,
copy here.
because we're going to read some. So, you're a publisher with a critically acclaimed novel, but everyone I know that knows you has always known you as a poet. But what took you so long to publish your debut collection?
I think that poetry, particularly the stuff that you collect, that you can put in a collection, you have to earn it by your life. It's essentially your life that it's essentially your life that you're putting here. I think of poems as being your blood on the page, essentially, which you have then curated. So it took me so long to be able to put this together because it took me that long to be able to put something together that I wanted to be able to push out there. The poems themselves had been written over a roughly 16-year period. And it was from those 16 years period, the best 100 of them, that I selected these ones and discarded the rest. So one needs time to live in order to write what must be one's best poetry.
I can actually see that because they're wonderful. Thank you so much for writing it, by the way. So this brings me back to you. And Antilola mentioned it as well. The collection is mainly about love, desire, romance. But the title is The Anguish and Vigilance of Things. Can you tell us more about that, the relationship between love and anguish?
Well, not so much a relationship. There's this idea of being, and it's an idea that has been um, famously pushed by James Baldwin, the American writer, of being at an angle to the stairs. So you're at an angle to the stairs of your life, essentially. You can see the stairs there. The upstairs room is there, but you've not yet taken the stairs. So you're at an angle to it. And it's basically like a philosophical position to be in. Because are you going to take the stairs and go up? Or are you going to stay there, but the stairs are there? So there's that idea of anguish and vigilance. And then when we talk about that, on the one hand, you have the aspirational influence of James Baldwin. But the line itself comes from another poet, Federico Garcia Lorca, who is a Spanish poet who got himself killed during the Spanish Civil War. And he uses this line. He was a sort of a doomed poet. He just got caught up in the whole thing and he dies there. And he uses this phrase to capture this same anxiety, essentially, that Baldwin talks about. And in all my poems, whether the theme is that of love, whether it's the places that I have been to, which, of course, by the very definition of travel, you cannot re enter. You cannot go back there. The woman you loved, you cannot love her the way you loved her when you were young. It's not possible. The cities that you saw, the way you saw them the first time you come to Kigali and you see the hills spread out there, you cannot go back there. So it's a bit of an axiomatic thing for me, and when I came across that phrase, I knew that this had to be the title of the collection because it was what held the whole thing together.
Fair enough. I actually do have a question about traveling, but we'll get back to that. In a 2019 interview with Brittle Paper, you said, and I quote, love ruins us in sequence, eventually, always. So some people, probably Zara, not me, will say that you have been served breakfast. Not me personally, but some people will. Um, but this collection is so moving, it's enriching, and it's healing in the way that if I have been served breakfast, it would actually help me. Did you set out to do that?
Um, okay, it's a bit difficult to. Okay, so it's a bit difficult to take on Zara and her take, but definitely, if you're going to live, you're going to live if you want to love, for somebody like me for whom love is particularly important, definitely the breakfast would be served. And what better way to memorialize those important highlights of your life than by writing poetry about it? So essentially, and this is the thing with poetry and with poetry collections, the fact that if you've done your work like you have done, you've been able to read the interviews, the things I have said by the way, and then you read my poems and you have an idea, perhaps by some way of figuring out when they were written, you would actually have the entire trajectory of my life. And that is why poems are always dangerous things, because they're, yes, there's a way that you have a leeway to be able to get across with prose, with fiction. I can always say, even everybody's first novel is always, no, it's not autobiographical. But we all know that there's a huge autobiographical dose to it. But there's no such thing as fictive poetry. Poetry is always your life on that page. It's always your blood. It's always your experiences. And these experiences will not always be joyful. It would not always be that moment when the swing is at the highest. It's also the aftermath, when you've had time to look back on your life and look back at it and you say, okay, what can I do? I can capture this moment in its cleanest, purest form, in the best thing that I can offer, which is a poem.
That's fair. I love what you said about. Oh, sorry. You can clap. I love what you said about it being autobiographical because in the introduction, it reads, he is not naked in these poems, but poems are testimony to what is laid naked. Someone is always naked beneath poems. It's as strong as by Imu Alquais. So, how true is that? How autobiographical is your work?
100% autobiographical. 100%. In fact, there's no line, there's no poem, no single poem, and within each single poem, no single line that was not dictated by somebody I met or something that I felt or something that I did or something that happened to me. There is no, the wall of being able to say that you have created a fiction out of it. There's no creating fiction out of your life. It is for good or for ill, the sum of what has happened, of what will happen, and the assumptions that you have wrung through by the very, very difficult crucible of experience, and that is what is left. I've often thought that poets are, I tend to have very diverse metaphors of what the poet does. And one of them is the idea of a prism, all right, of a prism, and then you've got the light that comes in. And because of our own particular fractures, as it were, we refract these lights in certain ways. And whether you have a red and yellow and blue and all the spectrum, it still comes from that light. It's still essentially the same thing. But because we are the way we are, because of our nature, our sensitivity, our essential, would you call it sadness? I wouldn't go so far as that, but a certain broodiness at the end of the day. I think that poets are naturally the universe's discontent. The idea of discontent and disaffection is always very, very close to poetry because they feel that, okay, I always give this example. When we step back, all right, there's always the idea of an exploding universe, a universe that is always expanding. And that is essentially chaos. All right, if the universe and the world in it and the Milky Way are always expanding, then that is essentially chaos, right? And all of that. But the poet wants to argue that beneath all the katakata, before it became this way, there was something a bit purer prior to that. So this tendency to be discontent with the realities of the everyday is really what sets people out to write poems. And each of them does this. And in that sort of honest, almost holy space, between you and the interaction with the sum of your life, there is no space for fiction. It's your life in those poems. It's your blood in those lines. And you can't lie in a poem. It's not possible. I don't think it's possible to lie. Of course, you could be commissioned to create something. I don't take them, but you cannot honestly lie in a poem.
I'm very happy about your response, in particular what you said about reality and experiences. Um, because one of my favorite poems in the collection is Wedding Feast at Ghana. Who remembers the 2006 Ghana massacre in Lebanon? 2006. Huh? Yeah. Anybody? So in 2006, Israel, of course, attacked Lebanon and killed over 55 people, many of whom were children, because I think we can all assume that Israel has a thing for killing people, children especially. But so Richard Ali actually has a poem about that. Can you please read it to us? 36.
Wedding Feast at Cana. It's on page 36. Theirs was a marriage of shells. Blood and wine are red. I was almost an Arab, but the plain was Jewish already. Father the groom floats through the charred space with his corpse bride. I lurk within her, hiding from eyes of pious ghosts, still denouncing love and sin. The walls are suited. It had been a nikah, but someone had grown weary of waiting. Did my father fret for the lavish feast? Did my mother fear an exposure of me, her sin? The feast ran out of wine, but the guests had not run out of blood. The wedding ended in a flash. Only I remained, without form, with a poem, without a name. I lost nothing but promise. I didn't see the bomb drop. It did not hurt my eyes. Children who see nothing cannot be hurt.
This is such a powerful poem. Now, how effective do you think poetry can be? Sorry, how effective do you think poetry is as a vehicle for activism?
A very strong role is served by poets, and that's why they tend to be in a very disproportionate manner. They tend to be the victims of authoritarian states and authoritarian spaces wherever you come from, whether it's a communist bureaucracy or whether it's a theocracy. All over history, poets, because of this ability to be able to distill things down to the essence, they have always been a threat. Because at the end of the day, what is the stuff of a poet? It's not walls and barriers, it's not bombs. Essentially, we're manipulating not even words, but sound. And we all hear sound. Whether you're a Sumerian person or you're in Baghdad 2,000 years ago, or you're in Syria a few years ago, or you're in one corner of Kano, sound, you hear it. And all people in the world, no matter what passports they carry, no matter their lack of passport, they hear sounds and they feel it at the very core of their selves. And that is why sometimes you listen to maybe Edith Piaf or some singer you've never heard before, Sadhu Bori, who knows what he's even singing. Half of the Sadhu Bori songs, you don't even know what it is he's singing. It could be his own language from Chad, sometimes it's Fufude, sometimes it's Hausa. But because he's playing with sound, he's essentially a poet. He has that poetic gift, and he's able to touch so many people. Now, it's the same thing with poets as well. Poets are essentially activists because when they write these things in this way, beyond what the thou shalt nots of societies, of dictators of every type, whether religious or the state or whatever, beyond the strictures of these sorts of dictatorships, words go across and touch people right here, which is where all the slogans of the state, all the indoctrination, all the double speak, all the algorithms cannot quite touch this place. And that's what poets do with their words and with their manipulation of sound. So a poet is essentially an activist figure. He can't help it any more than he can help writing the poems. It's not possible.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So you've mentioned different places, and even from your work, I can tell that you travel a lot. And there's Darfur. You mentioned Jerusalem. There's Ghana. There's Kampala. So, are you inspired by the places you visit? Are there certain stories from places that you feel need to be told through your poetry?
I've always been fascinated by places. I was born in Kano, as you know, but I grew up in Jos. And in the space of my growing up in Jos, Jos as a cosmopolis was destroyed in that place. And in my novel is called City of Memories. It's this idea that the city that exists, the Jos that exists today, is a Jos that has been destroyed. Essentially, my childhood and my memories of that place has been destroyed. And it's up to us to create a city of memory, to create how things were before the katakata, before 2001, September, and all of that. So there's always that. I've always been fascinated by spaces, by travel, by meeting new people. But it's not so much the places themselves as the possibility of human interaction. All right, to be able to go to that. There was a day we were in Kampala and we're trying to get out of the country, and I was supposed to pay the traffic, the bus fare. And we're here gisting writers and all of that, and I pay. And then when we get to the National Theater, the guy says, "No, we didn't pay." I'm like, "Dude, we paid you." And I'm going full on Nigerian there. I'm about to start parrying and all of that. They call a policeman. The policeman comes and, they speak Luganda with them. And then the policeman says, "Excuse me, sir, I don't think you paid. You should pay him." And this is me. Then I realize I'm the only Nigerian in this whole in this whole place, and that it's a Friday, and that if I get myself locked up, I'm not going to have any consular services until probably a week or two. And I always remember that place because of that. Not essentially because of the trip or the guy, but that interaction with humanity, as it were. A few years ago at Jalada, Africa, we decided to do a 4,500 kilometer road trip across East Africa, 5 countries. And everywhere I went, I made sure I ate the local food. In Eastleigh, I tried the camel meat, which is, something that is there. All the food, I tried it. All the local beers, I made sure I drank all the local beers, right from the DRC border all the way there. Because for me, it's not just even about the places, but it's about the opportunity to interact with a humanity that I share with people who I have never even met. And that is why. But when I code, of course, the background of a lot of the poems is those cities. But that's to borrow the title of Lola's poetry collection, it's my love of flight. Huh? It's my love. The best place I feel is an airplane going up. It means I'm going somewhere and there are so many new people to meet and share my life with them and see of their life. So essentially, that's it. But yes, I am fascinated by cities and places, but as not just as abstract concepts, but as places where people with whom I share a humanity dwell, and I get the pleasure to meet them there.
I love that. Thank you so much. You're well traveled. You were born in Kano. You are from Jos. You describe yourself as an Arabophile. You are highly influenced and inspired by Arab literature, and you call yourself an Arabophile because you say that it's because of the significant years you've spent negotiating an identity for yourself. So, having traveled all over the world, what identity have you concluded on, and how has that reflected on your poetry?
That's a very tricky question, all right? But essentially, I see myself as a northern Nigerian, essentially. At the center of it, I see myself as northern Nigerian, while being aware of how complicated and how tenuous that is. But essentially, everything that has formed me as a person and my history has been the history of this part of the Sahel. My maternal family, they started off in the Sudan initially. And about 600 years ago, they came here and they are the Kwararafa that you hear about. So they are the Kwararafa and they came to the to the Benue Valley, and they set up a series of states, essentially. And that's how we got into the Nigerian area. And even my own upbringing, my father, of course, he grew up, he studied here in Usasa, in Zaria, Kano, then Jos, and all of that. So there has always been, it's always been about northern Nigeria. In this Kaduna in the 60s, my uncle was an aide to the Sadauna Bello. Second Republic, we did our little bit there as well as part of the NPN. So the outlook has always been northern Nigerian, but of course the northern Nigerian has to be one that is nuanced. It's, of course, the Hausa culture is there. We all come to it with different givings, different takings, and all of that, and we can make it something open, the same way that English or the same way that Latin opened up Europe, the same way. But if we insist, for example, on a very nativist approach for it, then this thing breaks down. So I've always seen myself as somebody who carries the heritage of northern Nigeria, who cares deeply about the people of northern Nigeria, who would go out of his way to create a northern Nigerian expression and to help to platform it. And I have always done this. I have tried to be that person who creates platforms, essentially out of thin air. At the time we started Parisia with my partner Zafi, you know, it's something we did out of thin air. The same thing with Jalada, the same thing with Konya Shamsrumi. My coffee company, essentially the same thing. And we say, okay, what can we do? With the coffee, I'm saying, look, some of the best coffee in Africa is from Mambila Plateau here, yet nobody knows about it. So let me do something and put that Kwararafa name in everybody's face. So I've always cared very, very deeply about northern Nigeria. The stories, I love Sadu Bori. I don't care very much for Barmani Choge, but Sadu Bori, anywhere I hear Sadu Bori, it touches me like really, really here, you know. So that is it. So I see myself as essentially northern Nigerian, and I think it means something. It's something cosmopolitan that sought expression, particularly in the decade and a half between 1950 and 1966. And since that time, that sense of a northern identity, of a northern political and social aesthetic expression, tendency, business, since then, it has been buffeted by all sorts of challenges. And as frayed as it is, I still believe in that ideal. And I am the heritor of that ideal if my family legacy is to be considered. And why should it not be considered?
I love that you said that because we're going to another reading very soon. Do you want to find the page? Flame lines. But before we get to that, there's a myth that northern Nigerian men are not romantic. But so before we get to that, I want Richard to read one of his poems, Flame Lines, and then you guys can tell me whether you still believe that they're not romantic.
Okay, flame lines. Flame lines is on page 23. Lying there, I set fire to your bed. Flame. Okay, flame lines. Lying there, I set fire to your bed. Flame lines around you, curl heat of ink. Watch you turn your torso, see in the mirror a bird. Earth flown, goddess born, written, Mazaria, dragon bird. I come to your meets with lies of my own, these, dross of my story. You whispered in my ears once what impels herdsmen, and I gave you a thing I stole, meaning of my scars, that beneath the sea is another sea of sterling silver. This is our place, womb of our story, occult space, primeval. I'm your soul worshipper. My dicker is yours, my madness yours. Do not forget this place, Genebu, where all is stripped of us, where a man is man and priest and his woman is God.
Another Nigerian man romantic. Did you hear that? My dhikr is yours. I've never been told that. So personally, I know, even if they are not going to admit it, I know that some women would want to be the object of such affection. No? So what do you say when people say Northern Nigerian men are romantic?
Not, I think northern Nigerian men are like men everywhere. It's a mixed bag. When I was growing up, my father would not imagine picking me up. Like even if I were running towards him and I fall, like he wouldn't, that sort of thing. No, it's that. But with my daughter, I have a 2-year-old daughter. I am so much like, I can't see that. So northern Nigerian men are northern Nigerian men, and they are like men everywhere. And men change. One generation, they are all uptight. They don't know what to do with their children. They don't even know, they don't know what to do with you, so they often ignore you. And another generation comes and they are all over the neck of their, and all of that. So when you say northern men are not romantic, I think it's a generalization, and I think that those of us who are romantic, and those of us who particularly are not ashamed to, show that side of us, we show that side of us, and those who accept it, and those who don't accept it, well, it's me.
That's fair. By the way, the section is called The Woman God. So, when you do get your copy outside, I think you should start with that section. Huh? Oh, no, sorry, I was talking to them. Okay, so my next question is, over the last 30 years, not a lot of literature, especially poetry, has come out of northern Nigeria. Why do you think that's the case?
Wow, that's a tricky question, Uh, I wouldn't say not a lot of poetry has come. Is Umar Abubakar Sidi here? Yeah, I mean, he's one of the finest. He's a helicopter pilot, but he's one of the finest poets that we've had, and his poetry has it's like set a dynamite, uh, you know, in African literature as a whole, because this is how deeply felt and beautifully realized his poetry is. And he's from Sokoto, or Sokoto Maradun, Sokoto Zamfara. That's where he's from. And everywhere that you mention it, and I think he's even the superior craftsperson. Now, when we look at the younger ones, my wife writes some, I think my wife is even a more superior poet than I am. And she's probably more popular amongst the crowd here than I am. So there are lots of people who are writing poetry from northern Nigeria, and they are actually getting a lot of attention for it. A few years ago, CD and I, we set up something called Konya Shams Rumi, and it's a publishing house. So part of it is we set up a WhatsApp group as well. And there's actually a complete storyboard for Hausa poetry. And the interesting thing is some people post there in Hausa and some other person takes it, I'm going to translate it to English. And you have an English version on the English board and the Hausa version there. So lots of people are doing lots of really, really fascinating things in poetry. They might not have the visibility of, say, me and CD, or of people like Basha Muneni, who is perhaps one of the finest spoken word poets, bar none, and he's from Nasarawa State here. So there's a lot of people who are doing amazing things in poetry, but maybe they are younger and it's taking time. All right, but then again, when we talk about it, Alan Islam is going to be here on a panel tomorrow, I believe, and she's done amazing stuff, you know. So when we look at it, I think on the one hand, yeah, traditionally we've had the whole call and response thing, which has always been there, which is more singing, which is more choral and all of that. But we've also had amazing poetry from these people. And perhaps as time goes on, with our support, which is already given, they will get better known, you know. Another thing that perhaps I should also say is okay, so northern Nigeria tends to have a slightly isolationist tendency, which is that what we try to do, even the very, very best of it, we're quite comfortable with allowing it stay here. But one of the most important things that happened to me was the Black Heritage Festival in Lagos. It was German and Nikolapo, and he had some funding. He brought me, Razinat Mohammed, Gimba Kakanda, and who else was it, to attend that festival. And suddenly, all those people I had met on Creativity and Yahoo groups and all of that, I could actually see them. And suddenly, it wasn't just me staying in just behind a computer. I went out there and got it. So some of these are our younger poets who are writing. It's also important for them to submit as widely as possible, whether it's a Jalada Africa or a Brittle paper, whether it's some review in Connecticut or something in South Africa. You might get rejection slips, but eventually they'll start publishing your stuff. And suddenly you have a global audience for your writing. So I think, yeah, perhaps a bit of it is that isolationist tendency, but I do think that lots of people are writing amazing poetry here.
So my question is, I know that you have a lot of heroes in Arab literature when it comes to poetry, but what about African heroes, especially Northern Nigerian? Which Northern Nigerian poet were you inspired by, or did you look up to when you were starting out as a poet?
That's a very interesting question because unfortunately the answer is none. That's it. The answer is really none. Um, I always situated myself in that world of, I don't even think there were any major poets from northern Nigeria at the time I had started writing. You know, yeah, but Saad Zunguru, you can't talk Saad Zunguru without the politics. It's not possible. And I did not very much care for his politics. So, and all of that. So, of course, you had the Sayadu Zungur. You had the Moody speaking. I think he wrote some poems as well. But there was always that political patina of the PRP and the masses and the communists. Essentially, maybe their concerns, their communist or proto-communist concerns, lessened the poetry in my eyes. So I've always looked a bit further afield in terms of influences for poetry. Mahmoud Darwish, of course, the Palestinian poet, he was a major influence of mine, and I love almost everything that he has written. I've mentioned Federico Garcia Lorca, the Spanish poet. I've loved his poems right from the beginning. The way he paces his work, I try to listen to the words in that way and the way the sounds interact. So those were the people that I read, from the very, very beginning. But to a large extent, there were no real Northern Nigerian preeminent poetry voices that I read in that way. It's a bit salutary that in my case, some people read my poems and they feel that way inspired. But when I started out 20 years ago, the terrain was vastly different.
I think Kabafest 2029, somebody will say they were inspired by your poetry. But before I start the Q&A, I want to ask, it has been 10 years since you published your last novel. Should we expect one anytime soon or in another 10 years?
Yeah, so that's the thing, It's I think it's one of the things that makes me saddest. The fact that the older you grow, the more the responsibilities come, the more your time is precious. And you cannot, I mean, when I was younger, I could, and the money was there, more or less. With 300, 400,000, I'd get $2,000, put on a backpack, disappear for a week, go to Kampala or go to, I could do that. But right now, even if the money is there, I don't know where I'll find 2 weeks. I don't know where I'll find a month. It's really, really difficult. So I think that has affected my writing, particularly the novel. The novel I've been writing for the last 10 years. I'll tell you about it. It's about a northern Nigerian soldier who somehow winds up in Europe, World War II. He participates in the liberation of Paris, gets involved with all those post World War II ideologies and all of that, gets himself involved with a character on the British side of things, and he's deported and he's sent here, sent back to Lagos to prison where he's there for 2 years. Now, one of the quirks of history is that when we talk about the independence of Nigeria, we often talk, just use one sentence and talk about the people who came back, the soldiers who came back from World War II. But take a look at the list of all those people that were killed. Most of the soldiers were from northern Nigeria. Most of them are. Just go to any of the Burma campaign, the Abyssinian campaign, look through the list. And because there's this funny thing where people use their villages as surnames, you can always see where it is that they come from. But what happened was this: despite the massive promises that the British had made to them, when they came back, most of them simply went back to their farms, went back to their villages, and they did not demand the things that were due to them. The things that war people who had gone through trauma in the Second World War got in Europe, they didn't get it. The reparations, all of that they were supposed. So anyway, he comes back and then he gets into the middle of a plot with these returnee soldiers who, instead of what happened historically, going to their villages, decided to agitate against the British for what they were promised before going to war. So this is essentially the novel of yet another failed rebellion, but this is me going back to history to fix that anomaly of people just coming back. You've been killed and slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands, and you just go back to your farm. So it's essentially about this character. Now, I'm 40,000 words in, but the thing is, I've been 40,000 words in for 3 years now. So this is it, this is it, so it's about the time. Unfortunately, the time has become more precious. There's very, very little of it, and I've simply not been able to take out time off. But I'm really, let's just say my personal jihad now is to find 2 3 months and just disappear and knock out that first draft. If I can find it, I personally would be the happiest person to be able to say I've done this.
Who is looking forward to this book? You see, we all are.
Thank
So,
you
who
very
has
much.
questions? Abdul Karim? Is there a mic?
Hello, Richard
Yeah,
and
hi.
Khadija. My question is a regurgitation of her last question. You've been working on that novel since even before you got married. So this is really. So what's going on? How far along are you? Like 70%?
Okay, let's not.
Abubakar also has second question.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard Ali. My brother, who just confessed to be an ancient foreigner from the Sudan and other places. I'm just saying that since you are finding it difficult to write in these circumstances because you've been seeing star, um, you can come for consultation. Thank you.
Thank you for your
And the
generous-
workshop.
Okay. Yeah, I'm telling you. I don't deserve them, do I?
There's Auntie Khadija in front.
Okay. A serious question, and I know we've just finished laughing, so people might not like that I'm forcing us back into reality. The North is in a bit of trouble, and the trouble is internal. I firmly believe that what is going on with us is squarely our problem, and it's largely our fault. It's also been driven largely by some of the fractures that have widened among us. It's not that they didn't exist, but we've been fractured. So we're killing each other essentially. That's what it is. And on the surface, I'm not hopeful because I'm not seeing any sort of intentionality in the way that we're trying to address these problems. So my question is really, what role can the arts play given our current circumstances? Is there anything that the arts can help us do when it comes to justice, when it comes to repairing, and then healing and building again? And if so, what is sort of the roadmap for that? How can all of us here use the arts in that way? Thank you.
Can we have one more? There's a girl there. Second row, grey hijab.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so my question is, you said something that one cannot lie in poetry, right, Mr. Richard? Okay, so I'm actually an aspiring poet, but I've been having a writer's block for a while now. But there was this time I was writing poetry and I got my inspiration from a movie. And of course, we all know that movies are not real. Movies are, are made up. So would you say I have the wrong context of poetry? Or, in fact, normally my poetry is normally from imaginations. I can get my inspiration from either the way a mother treats her child, the way children bully other children, and other things like that. My poetry is mostly imagination. So will you say my imagination is a lie, or do I have the wrong context of poetry?
Do you want to answer these first?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when you say something from movies, at the end of the day, even the movies themselves, it might be fictional. There's a stage there are cameras, there are mirrors, and all sorts of things. But essentially, the movie is trying to touch life at the end of the day. That stuff, that ineluctable, that hard to reach, that ineluctable thing. Now, if you're able to find your inspiration from this stuff beneath the movie, what it is that it's trying to get to, then there's no way you wouldn't write true poetry. The trick is to understand what's at the bottom of it. Even if we consider, we look at filmmakers as being the masters of artifice and all of that, and, they do all the things with the lights and it's not what it is. But even they are trying to grasp at the ineluctable, the beautiful thing underneath life. And when of course they come to it with a formula, whether it's a three-act structure, whether it's whatever it is, they come to it with a formula, right? But at the end of the day, the story is about something. And if you are able to watch that movie, okay, well, I don't know which movies I should give, Lawrence of Arabia and his madness, for example, or Nigerian movies, Casablanca. Let's say Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart's famous Casablanca, and that deals with really with love and what you should do with it in that period of chaos. And there's a war going on, and there's this woman you love, and all of that, and you've got it there. Or a story, maybe which Nigerian Netflix, Breath of Life.
Blood sisters.
Huh?
Blood sisters.
Blood Sisters, for example. Yeah, or the Breath of Life. Breath of Life, which I saw on Netflix. Okay, it's on Prime. You know, I saw it and I loved that story. I really, really loved that story. But when you look at it essentially, you know, it's about a man who has gone as low as it gets. His wife and daughter are killed, and yet this young chef gives him another lease of life. So if you're able to touch life at that fundamental level, there's no way you won't write true poetry. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Um, yeah, thank you. To my sister Kadria, to my elder sister, um, yeah, a lot of our problems we caused it by ourselves. When we started to let go of the narratives that helped us, that created us. I'm just coming from the Bank of Industry building, and I passed the NDDC building. And the Northern Nigerian Development Corporation, things like New Nigerian, those were the stories, those were the expressions of stories that we told ourselves about what Northern Nigeria meant. The textile mills were funded essentially by these things that were created. And all over Northern Nigeria, there was an economic unity. A relative of mine as well, what the first Northern Nigerian Development Plan, he was also part of those who drafted that Northern Nigerian Development Plan. So there was an economic thing that joined all of us. And from Kaduna, they did not see Kaduna as just Kaduna State. No, Kaduna spoke to Zamfara, which did not exist then. And they situated things in Zamfara to speak to other industries, and there was always an integrated thing about it. And that is what stopped. And perhaps the first thing that happened was the creation of the states themselves. You know, perhaps that's one of the first things that started. And it created this whole administrative divisions and something that was, you know, from the central government to the local government directly. Suddenly you now have a new layer. And when you have political layers, you have people who are interested in creating middle necks and bottlenecks, as it were, in those areas to create new loci of power. And for every one of the 19 northern states, when you go into them, they now have problems of, oh, we want more states created out of us. So this is essentially a political problem. And unfortunately, this political problem has found itself in expressions of marginalization of various types. If it is an ethnic problem there, it's ethnic marginalization. If it's a religious one, it becomes religious, which is very, very potent. And this is what is happening in Southern Kaduna, Plateau, and all of that. And then the other things that are not even related to that, resource control issues, find their expression in both religious and ethnic terms. So we are the ones who are at the center of our problems. Now, how does art deal with these issues? By creating forums such as this, by opening up platforms, whether it's created out of thin air, such as Hadiza and Lola have done here. At least I have a hall full of people who are listening to me. There was a writer from Southern Kaduna, Edifai Yakusak, and she wrote this book after they left. And it's this interesting chronicle of the devastations that happened in that part of the country in this period of crisis, 2001. And if your DeFi is sitting on this podium, you'd be able to talk to her. And people who have no idea whatsoever would be able to see it. When I speak about my father as a young man in Kano and with his afro and the very, very cosmopolitan culture that he had, when I speak of the destruction of the Jos of my childhood, I speak about it and I speak about it from sadness, from remorse, from regret. Because my daughter, who is 2 years old, don't be surprised that her hometown will be New York or somewhere like that. And in that New York, she won't be able to play Baram the way I did it in Jos or hopscotch. So the arts gives us an opportunity to be able to present a different notion, often a nostalgic notion. And the people who were presenting it to, who are our peers, perhaps they'll look at it and say, no, in this respect, we have to do better. There has to be an ideal of a northern Nigerian unity where if something goes wrong in Jos, it should be of concern to people in Zamfara. If something goes wrong in Zamfara, it should be of concern to people in Maiduguri because it is interconnected. And this is one of the most ridiculous things that Nigerians do not get. And it comes down, I have a problem with state governments particularly. The entire country is a drainage basin of just one river, of the River Niger. The entire country is a drainage basin. So one thing, something touches one side, it will definitely touch the other sides. But for a long time, particularly since the return to democracy, and the problems in Jos started, we said, it's those just people, it's those just people. Then Kaduna started, it's those Kaduna people. Zamfara is, oh no, then Northeast started, it's those people there, it's those people there. Now everybody, you have refugees in Jos who are in Abuja who have been there for 3 to 4 years because of the problems in the Northeast. So everything has become an entire mess, and I think that our literature and the arts can give us a sense of what was and what is possible. If not, we'll just continue blundering from one chaos to the other in northern Nigeria. So it's essentially, to recap, it's important to have panels like this such that we can have these stories aired out and spoken about and even discussed. One of the things I would really like to see, actually, with panels like this, is people who would even sit down and transcribe and write. Okay, in this panel, this discussion on Hausa literature was done here, and it was such an explosive discussion. What did we take out of it? Syndicate it in the newspapers, perhaps, for people. One of the questions that Miriam Laushi asked about representation in Kannywood, it's a very valid concern, and the answers to it is perhaps that Kannywood is not as structured as we imagine it is. It's simply not as structured as we imagine, but we'll definitely love to see more representation of non-mainstream Northern Nigerian faces and voices and ethos there. So perhaps we should start looking at that. Because at the end of the day, what is a story but trying to touch the stuff of the world? And a Bura girl who moves from Garkida now, for example, to Abuja and has challenges and goes through those challenges and emerges on top is a story that everybody can key into. So that sort of diversity is important, and only the arts, whether it's poetry, whether it's film, can give us that opportunity. Thank you.
Are you going to answer Abdul Karim and Abubakar?
No, I'm ignoring Abdul Karim and Abubakar.
We have, I promised to people, I'm sorry, we have less than 5 minutes. The guy in the red hat and the guy in blue shirt. Where's the mic? Okay, there's a lady in front of me. I'm sorry. So can we have these last 3 questions and then?
Hello, everyone. It is
Hi.
once again the Queen Elizabeth's husband. So I would like to, in asking this question, refer all of you to the page 6 of your event books. You'll see Yasmin Erifai Foundation, and what we basically do at Yasmin Erifai Foundation is...
Can we clap for Auntie Adiza before we move on, please?
So basically what we do at Yasmin Erifai Foundation is the encouragement, nurturing, and even mentoring of artistic and creative expressions, providing safe spaces for these expressions and nurturing. And in line of this, we host monthly literary evenings where we invite guest artists. We have performances by poets on our open mics. And one of the most fulfilling experiences during this events as a facilitator of such is when I see young people come on the stage grab the mic and say they have been writing poetry for many years, but they had never felt safe enough to even share the text with people, let alone come on stage to perform such poetry. We have seen hundreds of them, and that is the most fulfilling thing for me. So beyond that, out of curiosity, I talk with these people. Why has this taken you so long? They tell me that mostly when they write these poems, they are intimate experiences of themselves, and they didn't feel they were comfortable enough at the time to share until maybe they have overcome whatever experiences motivated such writings. So, Richard, I am very happy when you mentioned that your poems are 100% self-motivated. They are 100% about you. Now, it has also taken you so long to write your book. So I wonder, is it the same story with the poets, young poets we have at Yasmin Arifai Foundation, who say they weren't comfortable enough at the time things happened to them when they wrote those poems until they have overcome such experiences? Is it the same experience? Have you overcome such experiences and that is why you now give out this piece to the world? Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Let's do the two. There's a lady, please. Is it blue or gray? Yeah, she's in the middle. She's looking at me.
Hi, hello. My name is Aliyah, and my question is similar to what was asked, but slightly different. Rumi says that the wound is where light enters you, and you said something very, very succinct, which is basically that the poet is like a prism of light. And recently there have been questions about what constitutes a Nigerian poetry. What is the language that we ought to use to distinguish something that is particularly Nigerian in poetry or poetic about Nigeria? And I guess my question is about this kind of tension often in poetry between its ability to soothe and its ability to also awaken. And really wondering, when we think about Nigerian wounds, and what it means to be a Nigerian poet right now, how do you constitute your role in creating works that do both, whether it's soothing and awakening? And in particular, this idea of light, right? Because we're in dark times, as somebody commented. These are very, very dark times. And there's a deep fear within many young people that it will get darker.
I'm so sorry, you have to hurry. I'm so sorry.
And so that's my question is, what is the role of poetry in times of darkness, and this balancing between soothing and awakening? Thank you.
My third person has disappeared, but I've been seeing this lady with the yellow glasses. Please, can we give it to her? We have less than 30 seconds.
Thank you. Mine is the comment. I just want to say I love your writing. And then today, when you talked about how these things are like our blood, it's really true about how an artist or a creative tries to put himself there. And then most things that you see, these are actually these persons there in different forms, different manners. Thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time, but
Okay, so I'll briefly take both questions. For the first person, there's no certainty of when a poet will feel ready to release their poems, and that's why when the poems come out, they come out. It might not be now. It takes maybe some sort of confidence, which they do not possess at that particular time. So it will take time. But I think that the most important thing is to continue to encourage them to write, to express themselves, to have a way out, and that's the most important thing that you can do. And I think you're on the path to that. I'm on the board of your foundation, and I've always given my time and effort towards that. And I look forward to continuing to do so. The question from my friend in the veil, what was the question? Yes, what is the role of poetry in these bleak times that we have? Often than not, the easiest way is we say that poets have to give us hope in these bleak times. That is not necessarily the case. Sometimes the poet can simply show us how we stumbled into this darkness. And that is enough for us to retrace our steps. So the idea often than not, and which puts pressure on poets, is, oh, when it's a time of darkness, we have to write poems of hope and liberation. No. It can also be, how did we get into this darkness? How did we stumble here? And that may just be what we need in order to get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Richard will be outside signing his books. Please go and buy a copy of The Anguish and Vigilance of Things and get an autographed copy.